Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV. Today is Wednesday, so it's one of our longer form shows, and it's our interview type show that we do once a month. I am Craig Mason, and I have with me, as always, Jeremy. Say hello to everyone, please, Jeremy.
Hi everyone, hope you're having a great Wednesday.
Absolutely. And so at the moment, we're talking about investing in property. So we're going to go through some more questions about that. And Jeremy's going to answer those questions that I've got for him. So stay tuned. A lot of valuable information will come from these questions about investing in property. It's an exciting time in your business when you get to the point where you can invest some of the money that you're making in different vehicles, and one of those is property. So when we talk about property and investing in property, what exactly are we talking about, Jeremy, and how does that sort of fit into the business legal life cycle?
Yeah, that's a great way to start, Craig. So phase 9 is investing in property. And that's after you've got a successful business, you've set up your systems and processes, you've got some employees, you've got a team, and you've started expanding. What we've found is that people that have run successful businesses start investing in property at this stage. And the reason for that is that they're making good money. They're making money that they can invest, and they're looking forward to the future, because as our business mentor David Dugan says, you should always have 3 businesses. You should have your current business, you should have your future business, and you should have your investment business. And this is really about that third business, the investing business, and about setting yourself up to have an income stream that is separate from your businesses. And a great way to do that is investing in property. So that's what investing in property is about. There are many ways of investing in property. You can buy all different types of property that we'll no doubt go through today. But it's about buying investments that will make a return to you and give you an income. Now, there's no such thing, in my view, as an actual passive investment, because you'll always have some involvement. You'll always need to have someone involved in the actual management of the property. But property is as close to passive as you're going to get. So that's what investing in property is all about, Craig. And that's what our theme is for February 2019.
Absolutely. All right. So you've made a decision that you want to invest in some property. Can you run through, for our viewers and listeners, generally the process that is involved with that? So obviously there's going to be things that are going to be different in different jurisdictions, but generally what's the process?
Yep. And this is something that we've talked about before, but I'll just say again that throughout different countries, different states, whether they're different states in Australia or different states in America, this process is broadly the same. So as I said in our show last week, I'm working version of the book, and I'm working with a lawyer out of Florida, and I can tell you that the law is very, very similar in Florida. So that would be an area for you, where I help you find what you're looking for to get you the right investment. So the next thing you need to do is to conduct a visual inspection of the property. And this might seem obvious to a lot of our viewers and listeners. However, it really does amaze me how many property investments never actually inspect the property. They go and buy a property having never seen it. You need to go and do an initial examination. That's one of the great things about properties, is that you can actually go and you can see, feel and touch everything that's in that property. So go and do a visual inspection of the property. Drive around the surrounding streets to get an idea of the area before you decide to buy. One of the things that I used to think was that I wanted to buy properties that I would want to live in. I've changed that view in the last 5 to 10 years. However, it's still important to drive around the streets to make sure that you're happy with the type of area that you're investing in. So once you decide on the property that you want to buy, you need to make an offer. So this is where things start to get different in different jurisdictions, but all jurisdictions have this concept of an offer, where you've got to offer to buy the property. So that could be a bid at an auction. That could be, you could do that before an auction. And you need to think about what conditions you want to place on that offer. So again, this does vary in different jurisdictions, but if you're looking at obtaining finance in some jurisdictions like Queensland, you can make your offer subject to you obtaining finance. You should do a building and pest inspection to make sure that all of the building approvals are in place, that there's no obvious structural problems with the property, and there's no obvious pest problems with the property. You need to do those searches before you enter into the contract, or at least make the contract subject to those, so that you can make the best offer that you can. So once you make the offer, it's really up to the seller as to whether or not they accept your offer. A contract, as we've talked about before in previous shows, is made up of an offer, acceptance of that offer, and some sort of consideration being paid. So they'll need to consider what offers have been made and whether or not they want to accept your offer. There are different rules in different jurisdictions about what they can actually accept and what that actually means. However, the basic principles of offer and acceptance do apply in different jurisdictions. If you haven't done it by this stage, you really need to appoint a lawyer or conveyancer at this point once the offer's been accepted, so they can actually handle the transaction for you. A lot of people think they can do it themselves. This is something where you shouldn't skip money. If you're spending any sort of money on a property, whether it be $20,000, $200,000, or $2 million, you're making an investment in that property. You need to make an investment to make sure that the process is done correctly through your lawyer, conveyancer, or in the States, they've got this concept called a title insurance agent. So you can talk to them. So you can have a lawyer in the previous steps. So when you're making offers and when offers are accepted, that is a good idea. However, I'm realistic and know that a lot of people don't do that. At least have a lawyer at this stage. The next part, and this is where the lawyer really comes in handy, is to conduct the due diligence on the property. So due diligence is, and I've talked about this before, is a term that is a kind of a legal fiction. It's something that we lawyers make up, and it's something where you need to do your searches of the property to make sure that there's nothing obviously wrong with the property. You can do council searches. You can do all sorts of searches in relation to the property. So you really need to do it at that stage, because if you don't, then you'll miss out. I'll go into a bit more depth a bit later. No doubt Craig will want to dive deeper into due diligence, so we'll go into it a bit later. But just know that that's the time to do it. Once you've got the contract in place, do your due diligence. So the next step is to really get into your transaction documents. So any property transaction, there'll be a register of properties, and there'll be a bunch of government departments, and you'll need to actually get those government department records all changed, and there'll be a bunch of government forms that need to happen. This is another point where your lawyer, conveyancer, or your titles officer can actually really help to get those things in place. The next step is the preparations to settle the transaction. So this is where you've got to pay the money and you get over the title for the property. So and often there are adjustments made. So things like rates and water usage, they're paid usually on a quarter basis or a 6-month basis or a monthly basis. And settlements never happen or not never, but very rarely happen on the actual changeover of those rates or water. So you need to do adjustments of those. And your lawyer and conveyancer will liaise with your bank to actually make sure that they've got the money ready to go to settle. The next step is the actual settlement. This is one of those funny things. I remember when I was an article clerk back in the early 2000s and doing conveyancing transactions and going and doing settlements. And from time to time, a client will want to come along and they'd see the settlement happen, and checks are exchanged and documents are handed over, and they'd say, "What did I pay you all that money for?" All the hard work's done before that. The actual settlement of the transaction is the easy part. Once settlement's completed, then all the relevant government docs are lodged, and the different government departments are notified, and then you become the owner of the property. And if you've got a mortgage, that gets registered on that. So, Craig, that's our 10 steps of the conveyancing process.
Excellent, very comprehensive, and I'd encourage everyone that's listening or this to access the show notes. So this is show 175. Knowing that process before you buy a property gives you as a buyer some form of advantage, knowing what's exactly going to happen throughout the transaction. You can tailor your offer to meet those conditions, etc. So important to know, and as a buyer you want every advantage you possibly can so you can get the best property at the best possible price. So get onto those show notes if you're thinking about buying property. All right, so we've got the process there, and obviously there's several different types of property that you might be buying, and they're not all necessarily connected to your business. What sort of different types of properties, are there? And just if you could explain briefly each one.
Yeah. Great question. It's funny, Craig. We were both trained by a conveyancer back at our old days in our old city law firm, and I was actually speaking to her yesterday about this very question. So it's very timely to talk about this. So basically, there are five different types of property. The first one is residential property, and that's the most common. That's obviously where you live, and that can be a house, it can be vacant land for residential purposes, it can be a unit, and it can be or a townhouse or something like that. So residential property is by far and away the most common type of property, and yeah, that's where people live. Excuse me. The second one is industrial property. These are properties that are specially zoned to allow you to operate industrial or manufacturing businesses. And given the type and use of those properties, they've got to be in special areas and be properly zoned to allow you to actually operate those industrial businesses. The third is commercial property, and these are where commercial businesses like our law firm would operate from, or other commercial businesses. They might be standalone properties, they might be converted houses, they might be part of a body corporate, they might be different types of properties, but commercial is generally where a commercial business is operated from. The fourth is rural property, and this is properties like farms, and other rural businesses. So there are a myriad of special rules that go into rural properties, no matter whether you're talking about here in Australia, the US, or the UK. So you need to be really careful when you're buying a rural property that you get the right lawyer who knows what they're talking about. The fifth and final one is retail shop, and if you think about the big shopping centres, Westfields, those kind of places, they're retail shops, so they have special rules and provide their own unique challenges because you've got all different types of businesses in there. So they're the five different types of property, Craig.
Excellent. All right. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a exciting part of your business life cycle. Buying property. So obviously it's a pretty important transaction to do. It's a large asset that you're going to be buying. So right before you sign on that dotted line and you're now in that contract, what's some of the things you should be doing before you sign the contract?
Yeah, great question, Craig. And there's really four areas that we need to think about here. The first is the entity. So anyone who's seen our previous shows or listened to our previous podcasts know that we talk a lot about entities, and this is really important because it's something that a lot of people don't understand. You have different structures that you can buy property in. There are different legal entities. You have companies, you have trusts, you have partnerships. You could buy property in your own name. You need to think about what actual legal entity is buying that property to make sure that they're the right person on the title for the property, and also that you get the best tax advantage. So in Australia, you can buy properties with discretionary trusts, which can have great benefits from a tax planning point of view. So you need to think about that really carefully and make sure you get advice. If you change your mind partway through the transaction, it can be really difficult and it can be really costly to actually change the entity. So if you want to go back, have a look at some of our previous shows on entities, we can, or contact us and we can have a chat to you about that. The second thing to think about is the price and the deposit. So the price is obviously the price that you pay for the property. You need to make sure that it's a fair and reasonable price. If you're not sure, this is where you need to speak to a buyer's agent. Have a look at examples of sales in the area and figure out what you're willing to buy and what you're willing to pay for the price that you can pay. The other element to this is the deposit, and usually a deposit is no more than 10%, and this is basically the amount of money that you pay to the seller to guarantee that you're going to go ahead with the transaction, and it's what the seller has to pay for any loss that they suffer if you don't complete the sale. The third thing to think about is, where's the money coming from? Few of us have the money to buy property outright. I wish we did, but the nature of property these days is that it is expensive, and most of the time you're going to have to borrow money. You need to think about where you're going to get the money from to buy the property, and you need to tell your conveyancer, your lawyer, where that money's coming from, so that they can make the appropriate inquiries to get the property done and money borrowed for the right time. You also need to think about how you're going to borrow the money. We're recording this in February 2019. There's just been a Royal Commission into bank practices and mortgage lending. Are you going to use a broker? Are you going to just go to the bank directly yourself? I would always recommend that you go to a broker, because they can help you get the best deal. So you need to think about all those things, and you should do that before you enter into the contract. And at the very least, make the contract subject to you obtaining finance to buy the property. The fourth thing to think about are what other conditions you're going to have in the property transaction. So are you going to have a building and pest inspection? Are you going to have due diligence, which we'll no doubt speak about in a minute? You need to think about the conditions that you're going to have, so that you can make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. So Craig, I think that's the things to think about there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So you've mentioned due diligence a couple of times. Let's do that now. So talk us through due diligence, why it's so important, and basically the sorts of things you need to look out for during that process.
Yes. So I have mentioned a few times, and I knew that it would come up. I think it's really important, and this is a good time to talk about it. And due diligence is one of those funny legal terms, as I mentioned before. And I remember this time when I was in the Supreme Court of Queensland, and we were having a dispute over what the term due diligence actually meant. And this resulted in a 3-hour argument by barristers from both sides with a judge trying to figure out what the term actually meant. It's generally accepted these days that due diligence is a term that lets a buyer of a property or other assets conduct all of the investigations and searches they need to do to satisfy themselves that they want to buy a property or other business. If they're not happy with any aspect, then they can terminate the contract for any reason. And it's basically a catch-all that lets them do that. There are a few different things that you can do in due diligence. The first is and I've talked about it a few times, council and local government searches. So no matter where you are in the world, there'll be a council or a local government that has records in relation to the property to make sure that what's been built on the property is properly approved, that the zoning is correct, the rates are paid up to date. You need to do searches to make sure that those things are up to date, so that you make sure that you're getting what you pay for, because there can also be rules about what happens with a property if the right approvals aren't in place. And that, in the most extreme cases, if an approval isn't there, then a property can actually be pulled down. So you need to make sure that all those approvals are there. The next ones are really important, and they're a title and plan. So in Australia, we have a system called the Torrens Title System, which basically registers all properties in a title register. And they're identified through plans, which are done by licensed surveyors. You need to do a title and plan to make sure you're buying the property that you think you're buying. They're really easy to read. Well, at least the new ones are. We've looked at some previous ones from like the 1940s and 50s, which are not as easy to read. But the current ones are pretty easy to read, and you can get a good gist of it. So doing the right title and plan searches, make sure that you're buying the property that you want to buy. And I've seen lawyers who don't do those basic searches. They're trying to undercut prices, and that can really be to your detriment as a buyer. So if your lawyer doesn't do them, make them do it. Pay the money. They're not expensive. A title and plan should be no more than $50 Australian. I don't know what it is in other countries, but make sure that you get it done, because they're really important. You're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a property. This is small change to make sure it's done right. The next one I mentioned before is physical inspections. Go and look at the property. If there are couches against walls, pull them back and just see what's behind them. Conducting a physical inspection is so important to make sure that you're getting what you pay for. And it's on you, buyer beware, if you don't do your inspections and there's massive problems that you could have seen. if you any agreements in relation to the property. So in one of the previous questions, I talked about commercial properties, industrial properties. They'll often have leases with tenants, such as other businesses. You want to review those agreements. Make sure there's no funny clauses. We've seen contracts where tenants have the right to get out of contracts whenever they want to. So, what's the value of what the landlord's actually, or the buyer's actually buying to be the landlord of the property? And if you've got questions, ask them. Ask them of the agent and ask them through your solicitor. Get written responses so that if there are problems that you can actually do that. So Craig, they're the real things out of due diligence, and I think it's something that a lot of people try and skimp on, and they really can be to their detriment, can't it?
Absolutely, as you said, they're buying something that's potentially one of the most expensive assets they're ever likely to buy, and taking these steps at a small cost in comparison to the asset value is pretty important. And as you said, people will try to sort of undercut it all, but pretty important to actually do it all and not skip anything. So that's we went through the conveyancing process, different types of property, what you really need to look at before you sign that contract, and then one of the most important things about due diligence and following that process. So is there anything else that you wanted to add, Jeremy, about investing in property that our viewers and listeners may need when they're going down this journey? I
think the most important thing, we've said it a few times, is to get advice. This really is, it isn't something you should try and do yourself. I know my parents bought their first house and they did it themselves. That was 40, 50 years ago now. I shouldn't age them too much, but say 40 years ago. And I remember when I was first a lawyer and thinking that was a really poor decision. But they got through it and they thought that everything was okay. These days you just can't do it. There is so many different things in property. There are so many different things that you need to look at. Get advice. Talk to your consultants. Get the right people to give you the right advice. Do your searches. Don't skimp on a few $100 here, a few $100 there. Because, look, 90% of the time, there's probably not going to be a problem, but you don't want to be one of those people in the 10% that actually causes the problem. So get advice, spend the money, do it right. All of those things are tax deductible, especially if you're investing in property. If you're buying your own house, you don't have to pay tax, so you can't claim it back. But if you're investing in property, most of the things that you spend money on, whether it be lawyers, depreciation schedules, accountants, that stuff is tax deductible. Whether it be when you buy the property or when you sell the property, get the right advice, and it will save you a lot of sleepless nights. So that's what I like to say at the end, Craig, and I think that sums up nicely this phase of investing in property.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for all of that excellent and valuable information for our listeners and viewers. As I mentioned during the interview, this is show 175, so I encourage everyone to get on to our website, businesslegallifecycle.com.au, and go to show 175 to get the show notes. If you like the episode and you know of someone that could get some value out of the information that Jeremy shared, please let them know. Get them, share it on Facebook or wherever you might be listening or viewing it, and get them into the show so we can share all that information with them going forward as well. So we encourage viewer and listener involvement via feedback, questions, etc., suggestions for other shows. So please get involved in the Business Legal Lifecycle. Jeremy, I think that's it for us today.
It is indeed. We'll be back on Monday with another Fast Fix Monday.
Excellent. See you all later.